Thank you. Well, it's fun to be here because, as you know, have heard now, we are graduates of DMAC. All of us, me, I was the first one, but that does not make me the eldest, just need to tell you that. I was actually 16 when I started at DMAC because of a couple of things. One was because I was born in Canada, and when we moved from Canada to the United States, they put me in a grade ahead of my age, and then I graduated early. And so I ended up coming to DMAC when I was only 16. And as if that wasn't bad enough, I was a naive 16-year-old. Oh my goodness. And the people who were in college with me, those were Vietnam War veterans. They were not naive. So my very first class at DMAC was math, and it was taught by a sergeant. And he was scary, man. He, after the first quiz, he shouted at us as if we were in his platoon, or whatever you call it. And well, I cried because, you know, I was just a kid. I was 16. And I sat there with tears rolling down my eyes. And afterwards, he passed out the tests, and I found out I got an A. But one of the vets, he was so sweet. He really felt sorry for this poor kid. And he said, do you want to come out to my truck to smoke some pot or weed, whatever they called it in those days? That was even worse. I was now terrified. I kind of like and ran. So another class I had that first semester was biology. And in biology, my teacher was explaining to us about the first the first experiment we had to do. But first she had assigned us lab partners. Yeah, she assigned me this huge guy who was a veteran, much older than me, and I was terrified of him. So she was explaining this experiment and telling us what not to do. And I listened, and I looked at him, and he was doing what she told him not to do, and I was like, so I just kind of backed away. Because she said if you did that, it would explode. So I backed away a little more. And she then told us we could go ahead, and he lit the Bunsen burner, and it exploded. It hit the ceiling, and he fell over on the ground. And when he came to, I looked at him and I said, yeah, I thought that would happen. And he said, why didn't you tell me? I said, have you looked at yourself? You are terrifying. He says, you're terrifying. So that was how I started at DMAC. It got better. And I actually did graduate, and I enjoyed it after I stopped being afraid of everybody. And I gotta tell you, community colleges are the best. DMAC in those days was great. I don't know what it's like now. Probably it's still good. But further on in my life, I actually did work as a university professor. I just retired from teaching at a community college in Northern Virginia. As part of my career, I also worked full-time at the local full-time university, or the four-year university called George Mason University. And at that time, George Mason thought a full-time teaching load was 2 lectures and 4 labs. I had a lot of time left over, so I also did adjunct teaching at Northern Virginia Community College. Why am I telling you this? Well, in my 2 classes, I was using the same exams, the same teacher, the same assignments. Everything was the same. But you know what? The community college students did way, way better. And we did some research on why that was. I don't think it's because they were just smarter, but I think it's because community college students are motivated, and because the classes are smaller, and I don't know what other reasons. But I'm just telling you, you are doing a good thing starting at a community college. Don't think that this is inferior to a 4-year college. It is not. In the 4-year college, I was teaching 150 students at a time. In the community college, it was 25. And consistently, the community college students did way better. How much better? 90% of my class in the community college passed. It was a hard class, teaching microbiology. How many in the 4-year college? 60. Big difference. So just telling you that, that's just the beginning. As Max, Dr. McElwain, whatever you call him, told you, I have had a lot of jobs in my life, and what I'm doing right now is writing books because that's really fun. That's just the kind of person I am. I just kind of do one thing after the other. So I thought, since this is a composition class, you might like to know, okay, how do you get to publication? How does that work? And what is the journey from having an idea for a book to publication of the book? Well, the first thing I did was listen to my mother. While I was growing up, my mother always told her 5 kids stories of her childhood. And she lived in the Netherlands. And so they were interesting to us, besides that they were just about our mom. One of the stories she told us was because she was the youngest and smallest child in her household, she always got the smallest dessert, and she did not like that. So what she did was, one day when her mother spooned out everybody's dessert, she quickly spat in the biggest dessert so nobody else would take it. It didn't work. Her mom caught her and she got in trouble. But it was kind of funny when I put this in the book. She said, "Carolyn, I would never do that." And I said, "Mom, you told all 5 of us that you did that. It's staying." Other stories she told us were a little more scary, but because we were young, I certainly didn't realize that it was scary. For example, she told me about a time when she was on a seesaw or a teeter-totter with her sister up and down in a playground, and the bombers started dropping bombs. Mom was at the bottom and her sister was at the top. So Mom jumped off to run away and her sister fell and hurt her behind. I just thought that was a hilarious story. Do you know, it never occurred to me that having bombs dropping while you're on a teeter-totter might be scary. But that's one of the stories she told us. And later on, when I was doing research for this book, I actually found out where that was and when, and it was very cool because it turns out that my mother and her sister, who's now deceased, were the only witnesses of the bombing of the Kleikamp building in The Hague. And they were sitting on the teeter-totter and watching the bombers. So it's a pretty cool thing, and you can read more about that in the book. All right, well, 5 years ago, my father passed away. My father was a wonderful man. He was very beloved, and he was a little silly, as you can see. And he also told me stories from when he was a child. Dad was half Jewish. And so when he was a kid, he lived in a children's home with his brother, and he told us a story of one day when the Nazi soldiers came to their home, and they put the children against one wall and the soldiers were against another wall behind a table, and they said to the kids, "You here, you here, you here," and they separated the children in that home into two groups. There were about, I don't know, 30, 40 kids. And Dad and his brother went to one side and his cousins went to another side. All the children on that other side were shipped out to Auschwitz, where they died. And I don't know why Dad and his brother were not chosen, or not chosen, yeah, whatever. And but I realized I couldn't ask him any more questions. He was gone. And so I thought, you know what, I need to write down the stories from my mother's childhood, because she's still here. I can still ask her questions. And so that's how this book got started. I was writing down the stories that she told me while she could still answer the questions. So what we did was, once the book was written, or once I'd written down all of Mom's stories, I then had to give it to her and say, "Hey Mom, did I get these right?" Now some of the stories she said, "No, you didn't get that right," and told me what was right. In other stories she said, "Hey, you forgot this story." "Well, you never told me." And so we worked together then to fill in the gaps in the book. Another thing I had to do, because this was a historical book, was to look at the history in the Netherlands of World War II. And that was very interesting because I actually found I didn't know very much about it. And so I had to learn about what was going on at the time Mom was experiencing all these things. You see, Mom was only 5 when it started. She really didn't know what was going on in the country except for what she heard her parents talk about. So we had to be careful, I had to be careful with that and get the story straight. Another thing that we had to decide early on when writing the book is, what's the genre? What age group are we aiming at? And well, obviously the book is about a child, but you can't have a children's book that contains scenes of bombing in it. So maybe, well, kids start learning about World War II in high school, right? So maybe it should be a young adult book. Well, what I discovered is young adult books can only be about young adults. Did you know that? The main character in a young adult book has to be a teenager. Otherwise, it doesn't get published. Well, maybe it's a memoir, story of her life, right? We could have done that, but the only memoirs that ever get published are those by famous people. And Mom is not famous yet, so that wasn't gonna fly. And so what we decided to do was to put dialogue in and also have it be written as if it was her telling the story, but help people to actually be in the story with her. What we wanted to do was paint a picture of her life as a child by using first person, which we did, and also, of course, then putting in the story arc. I'm sure that maybe you've learned about story arc in your English class, and if you haven't, you'll learn that one day. And that is, every story needs to have a story arc. It needs to start with a main character who has flaws. Now, Mom would tell you she doesn't have any, but if you read the book, you might find out she does. And this person goes through various events, and then as the book goes on, they reach a point where they have to change. Something happens where they go through a dark night of the soul. And as a result of that dark night of a soul, they then have to change in some way. And then the book resolves. Every story has to go through this. Whether it's a story or a book, you have to do this. But this is just the story of Mom's childhood. How do you do that? So I had to do some digging with Mom and find out, okay, what events were there in your life that really made you think, I just want to give up, I've had it. And what did you do as a result of that? And so we had to do a lot of digging in order to put her story into the framework that it needed to be in, to make that the way it should be. It's interesting to me that what my English teachers told me they didn't do just to fill the time. Isn't that funny? All right, now once the book was had been put into that, we needed to do some more work on it. For example, the first page has to tell you, the first page of a book has to be really interesting and has to tell you all about everybody in the book. And it has to be engaging. It has to be engaging enough so that when somebody reads the first page, they don't just put it back on the shelf. And so there was some work to be done on that. It has to have active voice. In that you can't just tell people about the story, you actually need to involve them in the story. You actually need to make it, you just use active voice. And so that was something else we had to go through, or I had to go through and figure out. COVID was very helpful to us because during COVID, Mom moved in with me. It was safe for her to live with children, so she didn't have to go out to the grocery store, etc. And so she lived with us. And every day we sat down in front of the computer And we would go through the dialogue, and I would say, okay, is this the kind of thing your sister would have said? Is this the kind of thing your dad would have said? And at that point, I learned that my grandfather had potty mouth. That's a British term, isn't it? He was foul-mouthed. He used a lot of bad words. And in fact, so much so that when we finally got a publisher, the publisher said, oh, there's too much swearing in the book. I'm like, well, that's what my grandfather did. So we took out some of it to make her happy. And I said to my mom, what did your mom do when she was stressed out? Oh, she said she was gonna go throw herself in the ocean to drown. Wow, okay, that was, pretty scary growing up, but that's what we had to learn. So I had to learn to paint the characters with Mom's help, because of course she knew these characters. I didn't. They lived in the Netherlands. I did not grow up in the Netherlands, so I had met them, but didn't really know them, certainly to that end. So we had to look at the ends of the chapter to make sure people are willing to turn the page when they get to the end of the chapter as well. After all that, it was time to find a publisher. The first thing, we had to decide, are we going to self-publish, or are we going to find an agent and a publisher? If you self-publish, you're responsible for editing and putting it into the right format, and you don't really get the same attention that you would if you have a publisher. But you do get some money. If you have a publisher, they do all that. They take most of everything. So we had to decide what we were going to do, and we decided we wanted to give the book the importance of actually having a publisher. Then it is time to write a query letter. A query letter is a one-page letter where you have a hook, and then you write just one paragraph about the book, and you write why you are the best person to have written it, and finish it. And that query letter is like a picture for the agent or the publisher of how amazing an author you are. You cannot have any grammatical errors in there. You cannot have any misspellings. It needs to be perfect. And if it's not, it gets thrown out. So I queried for 2 years. You also need a lot of persistence. This is not abnormal. Many for example, the Harry Potter books, she queried forever and had a hard time finding a publisher. But you just have to keep going and going and going. And in the end, we did find a publisher, Amsterdam Publisher, and so we were on the way. That doesn't mean we were done. Because once you find a publisher, the publisher then starts going at the book. The publisher will then find a content editor. This is somebody who reads through the book to see, does it make sense? Are there any questions that are going to be raised in the mind of the reader that the author has not addressed? Is there too much swearing? She thought there was. Is there a better way of saying things? Is there any repetitiveness? Are there details that nobody cares about? For example, yesterday was the Feast of St. Nicholas in the Netherlands. And on St. Nicholas, kids get lots of amazing, different Dutch candy. And I thought it was vitally important that the reader find out about every single kind of Dutch candy that's available. And the copy editor said, cut. So it was out, because readers don't care. So we had to be willing to let go. Quite difficult. Next is the copy editor. The copy editor looks for grammar, looks for voice. For example, because the book was written in first person, as if Mom is telling the story, she couldn't tell you what was going on in her mom's head. Quite often, it's hard not to have, because you as the author know what is going on in your characters' heads, it's tempting to put in what's in the character's head. You can't do that, especially not if you're writing in first person. I had to figure out ways of making sure that what was going on in her mother's head was shown through her mother's actions. I couldn't tell you what was in her mother's head. I couldn't say her mother was stressed out. I had to say that her mother said she was going to go throw herself in the ocean. And so that is what a copy editor looks for. Next is the proofreader. The proofreader looks through the book, and they look for typos, pretty much. You know, repeated words, left out words, misspellings, typos. And I am told that our proofreader missed 3 mistakes. If you read the book, please do tell me about those typos. I will be so grateful because I don't know where they are and I'm not about to read it again. So if you would do that, that would be awesome. Another thing that had to be done was figure out the title. The title of a book needs to be gripping. It needs to be interesting. And because Mom, all the way through her life, kept a brave face, she, when she was starving and had the big belly and the spindly legs, and someone looked at her and said, well, she's going to be the next one to drop dead, she did this so she would look fat. She's just that kind of a person, brave face. And so I thought that would be an ideal title for the book because it really encapsulates the kind of person that my mother is. The subtitle has to tell you what the book is about. It has to be much more detailed. Apparently it doesn't matter how long it is, and so that's what we chose to do. And the cover design needs to be attractive and also tell people what the book is about. Did you know that most readers choose books entirely based on their title and the cover design? Nothing else. And so I actually found a website where you can post a contest for the cover design and got 90 people to send in a cover design for the opportunity to win a prize. And this guy, Halitha Nilmal won the prize. I believe he lives in Bangladesh, so pretty cool. And I think he did a great job with that. So finally, book's gonna come out, and guess what? Nobody's gonna know about it. It can be published and nobody will know about it. It needs to be publicized. And that can be the job of the author and the job of the publisher, but more often than not, it's the job of the author. And so the author needs to know not just how to write a book, but also how to create a website and how to publicize through Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter and all those things. And to be willing to do it every single day, which is what I've been doing. And and also write blog posts, which I have not been doing. There's only so much a person can do. But yeah, so that was publicity is the next job that needs to be done if you are writing a book. And it's, like I said, it's very important. Actually, 80% of books published by the top 5 publishers in the United States sell 99 copies or less. That's incredible. 96% sell less than 1,000. Only 10 sell more than 1 million copies. Why is that? That's publicity. It's also because if the author is famous, they get publicity just because of their fame. But it just does go to show it's very important to do this publicity stuff if you want to succeed as an author. I was very excited. We got over 100 pre-orders. So we were above 80% of those in the top 5 publishers, and we're not in the top 5, before the book was even published. So that was very exciting to us, obviously. So then the best part, and that is once the book is published, finally, which happened for us on November 1st, because then you get to share it. And so you get to do things like contact your old alma mater and say, hey, can we come and talk to people? And sometimes they say yes. And so we've been able to present the book in bookstores and in churches and in other formats in obviously in colleges, in high schools, etc., and talk about it. And that has been really fun. These pictures are actually from a previous book that I wrote, where the book was part of a movie, which was really fun because I got to actually walk the red carpet, and that was me many years ago with my husband, and so that was really fun. This book has not yet been picked up by a movie producer. When that happens, if that happens, you can say that you heard us speak way back when.